Aloha, I'm Evan Leong from Brain Gain Hawaii, and welcome to today's Save Hawaii Jobs and Businesses webinar for June 9, 2020. Hope you folks had a break in between, and we have a lot of things to go over today. If this is new for you, we have a resource folder with updated memos and previous webinar videos on YouTube. Please make sure you review those documents before asking a question, since most of our answers are in those documents. Buddy, I think, already posted it in the chat area, so you can have the links there as well. Please let me introduce our team for today. We have Jane Sawyer, who's the Hawaii District Director for the SBA and our champion for Hawaii small businesses. Darin Leong is a specialist in employment law from the law office of Darin R. Leong. Stacy Katakura is the CEO of Accumulus, which is an outsourced CFO and accounting firm. Jeff Harris is a specialist in employment law and a senior named partner at the Torkelson Law Firm. Buddy Leong is the Executive Director of Virtual Student Experiences and handles our communications, backend, and chat box. Koko Leong is our editor at Brain Gain Hawaii, in charge of content, YouTube channel, and podcast. And our newest person on the team is Beckett Wren, who's the head canvasser for Virtual Student Experiences and handles our show notes and helps support the rest of the team. Questions will be taken today through the Q&A module only. It's the button on the bottom if you're on a laptop or desktop. If you post it in the chat box, Buddy will probably ask you to post it in the Q&A box. Please upvote questions in the Q&A module, and we'll do our best to answer those in the latter part of the webinar. Please remember, this is a fully volunteer effort. Our team has personally answered hundreds of questions, email threads, and invested hundreds of billable hours that have been donated. Legal disclaimer for today: this information is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as legal or tax advice. Please consult your attorney or accountant to discuss your particular business situation. SBA's participation in this presentation is not an endorsement of the views, opinions, products, or services of any of the participants, persons, or entities. All SBA programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. This information is current as of now, June 9, 2020. So let's get started with Jane Sawyer. Thank you.
Aloha, everybody. Nice to be here and tell you about some changes that are going on with some of the COVID-19 response financing programs. Well, it's kind of a good news, bad news day. I think that's the only way to sum it up. As you know, the end of last week, Congress passed a payroll, a PPP Flexibility Act to help us loosen up some of the boundaries as this pandemic continues on. Happily, we're seeing businesses open up again a little bit, seeing people get back to work, seeing some of the numbers across the country show that PPP is working as people are getting back to their jobs. But how does that work for us? Right now, we got some big changes that happen with the program, but since most of the PPP loans have come in prior to these changes, we still are waiting to see how those will be applied. In Hawaii, we have over 23,000 of these loans for almost almost $3 billion. And that doesn't even count the EIDL loans that are going on as well. Right now, we have at SBA, they're processing, looking at over 6 million loan applications, and we're only about 12 to 14% through those applications. So I apologize, but some of us are still going to be waiting for some of those results for a while. Hang in there, be persistent, and hopefully we'll start seeing those move a little more quickly. I think some of the changes, we're going to hear a little more detailed observation and report on some of those changes as we move to some of the other panelists today. But one of the things that they did have a few things that were questioned as the reports came out on the changes in this new act. And one of those things is that the deadline for applications is definitely still June 30th. Other deadlines have been extended on into the year, but the last chance to apply, if you haven't done so already, or your friend or somebody who you're talking to hasn't applied, it's still going to be June 30th. And the key thing is that the bank has to have screened that application, and they have to have their SBA loan application number, their loan approval number from SBA when the portal for SBA closes. that evening. So if it's not done, I'd try, to get it done before June 30th. So that's one thing I know for sure. There's some others that we're going to be discussing that we don't quite know for sure what it means, but hopefully the increased flexibility, some of the new guidelines will be helpful for you and your business as you work your way through this next reopening phase for Hawaii businesses. I think it's Darin.
Thank you, Jane. So a couple of quick opening comments. One is that we have not updated the forgiveness memo or the memo for employers to incorporate the payroll Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act yet. The reason is that we don't think there's enough clarity in it to do so. If you're looking for those changes to be reflected in those two documents, they are not yet. We're waiting for guidance. The second sort of overall comment is more just commentary, which is if we go all the way back to early April, the one thing that has remained constant about all of this is that for those businesses who did sort of what the program was laid out for right off the bat, which was to immediately put everyone back on payroll for 8 weeks, and then take 25% of the money and use it for rent, utilities, etc. Those are the businesses right now who the calculations will be much simpler. For the rest of us, that's where this new PPPFA comes in, and is certainly not the clear savior of all that it has been touted to be. So we're trying to work through it, but I will pass it over to Jeff to give some overview of the changes, and then I'll talk through what I think is a decision tree to walk you through the analysis. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Darin. Congress made generally 8 changes, or eight different things about the PPP and the PPPFA. First, they said borrowers may extend the covered period to 24 weeks or December 31st, 2020, if that's earlier, or keep it at 8 weeks. First question I have when I read that is, well, is it up to 24 weeks or not? The language of the statute doesn't answer that question. Hopefully we'll get a clarification on that, but right now it says you choose 24 weeks or you choose 8 weeks. Second thing they did is they said borrower must use 60% of the loan on payroll costs to obtain forgiveness, other than 75%. They reduced the amount that is allowable to use on payroll costs from 75 to 60%. They also said borrower may use up to 40% for non-payroll costs. Right? So and there was some early concern that the way the language was in the statute, the 60% was a cliff. In other words, unless you use 60% on payroll, you got no forgiveness. But a press release, a new and interesting form of government regulation, clarified that the 60% is no cliff. You can use less than that and still get some forgiveness, but the rule is 60%, 40% now instead of 75%, 25%. The next thing they did, the fourth thing they did, is in connection with the forgiveness rules, that forgiveness can be reduced by if you don't have all the full-time equivalent employees' annual salary or hourly wages that you had relative to one of your base periods. They changed the timing. They said the borrower may avoid forgiveness reductions by restoring the February 15, 2020 full-time equivalent employees and or annual salary or wages lost by December 31st, 2020. So they moved that deadline from June 30th to December 2020. Question, the obvious question there, and I've seen it already 5 or 6 times a day in our questions, is, well, can I just take 10 weeks and restore everything there? That's not clear from the statute. That would have to come by further government clarification. Next thing they say, it's a new forgiveness rule. They say forgiveness is available if the borrower is unable to hire individuals who are employed on February 15th, 2020, similarly qualified individuals by December 31st, 2020, or return to the same level of business activity due to guidance issued by DHHS, CDC, or OSHA. No, they do not say you couldn't return to the same level of business because of a decline in business activity because of the governor or the mayor's orders. 6, they say you may obtain forgiveness before December 31st, 2020 and still continue deferring your share of 2020 Social Security contributions. This is contrary to what the IRS had previously said. You can get your forgiveness. You can still defer your share of the 2020 Social Security contributions, with half due at the end of 2021 and half due at the end of 2022. In addition, the deferral of the payment of principal, interest, and penalties on your loan is no longer tied to any duration requirements. It's instead until the SBA sends the lender the amount of the loan that you've had forgiven. But that's only if you submit your forgiveness application within 10 months after your covered period ends. And finally, for any loans that are issued after the effective date of the act, I guess June 4th or 5th, I forget which date it is, there can be a 5-year term on those loans. Loans issued before that date, the banker, it's unlikely, but the banker can agree to extend your term out to 5 years. That's really a summary of what they did. It leaves a lot more questions unanswered, and I'll turn it back to you now, Darin.
Thanks, Jeff. So, I mean, let's just collectively acknowledge that the goalposts keep moving. Everyone has, most people have a little bit of frustration at this point. So all we can do is work with what we have, which is what we're doing. So in terms of people who have not received a PPP loan and are now thinking of getting one, it does not look like our local banks are accepting applications, but it does look like PayPal, potentially Square, some of the fintechs are taking. So with respect to everyone else, which is I think 98, 99% of people on this webinar, question is where you stand now and what happens. So let me try and walk through what I think the analysis is. Okay, so for everyone, that 75-25 to payroll costs, non-payroll costs has become 60-40, as Jeff said. It is the same categories of payroll costs, wages, leave payments, retirement benefits, etc. And it's the same non-payroll costs. There's no changes to that stuff. So rent, utilities, mortgage interest. Okay, it's just the proportions have changed to lower the amount that you need to spend on payroll costs, has been lowered from 75 to 60. The other thing that's happened is for those of you who already have PPP loans, you now have the option of a 24-week forgiveness period as opposed to an 8-week forgiveness period. The reason why this is not the cure-all to using the loan and getting full forgiveness is because the loan amounts were 2.5 months of payroll costs. And if you spread that out over at 60% over a 24-week period, it's definitely not going to cover even a majority of that time frame. So you're going to be spending payroll costs out of your own pocket. The second issue is that the 24-week period, if you are taking that one, now becomes the period of time that you have to maintain FTEs, full-time equivalents, at the levels of the reference period, and also maintain salary wage reductions. So for those businesses that have held on to the money, who supposedly this is supposed to help, almost certainly if you take the 24-week period, you're going to have reductions in forgiveness based on the FTE counts, most prominently, because your average FTE levels over that 24 weeks are not going to meet your January, February of this year FTE level, nor are they going to meet the February through June FTE levels of last year. So if you are going 8-week period, the benefit there is that you are at a shorter FTE reduction period. So if you're doing the calculation there, if you packed in all your employees into that 8-week period, you may want to stay there because you might have very limited reductions based off of FTEs or salary wage reductions. If, on the other hand, you have to take the 24-week period because you've been holding on to the money, just know that you are going to contend with these FTE and salary wage reductions that are going to be spread out over that 24-week period, okay? So either way you go, whether it's the 8-week period or the 24-week period, there are now essentially 3 ways to avoid the forgiveness reductions. So assume, regardless of whether you're in the 8-week or the 24-week period, assume that you are facing, reductions in your forgiveness because your FTE levels were lower over either the 8-week or the 24-week period. What do you do? So there are 3 ways in which you can avoid those reductions. The first is what we've been working off of, which is the pre-existing safe harbor, which according to the forgiveness application said, if you get those wages and get those FTE levels back up to the February 15th level, you get them back up by June 30th, then there'll be no reductions in forgiveness. Well, that June 30th goalpost, as Jeff mentioned, has now been moved to December 31st. So the first ambiguity, and I'm going to preface this by saying all 3 of these ways to avoid the forgiveness reductions are riddled with ambiguity now. So the first one is the goalpost moved from June 30th to December 31st. We do not know what the rules will say, whether they will say you have to now measure at December 31st, whether they say you can measure at the time of a forgiveness application. We just simply do not know. All we know is there's going to be something that says if you get your counts, your FTE counts, and your salary wage reduction counts back up by date, that it will count as a safe harbor and wipe away any reductions in forgiveness. The second way to avoid these reductions in forgiveness for FTE counts and salary wage reductions is with the new employee availability exemption, which is part of the new PPPFA. So this second method is if you have an inability to rehire or fill the positions that you had pre-February 15th, that you're unable to fill those positions by December 31st. I'm almost certainly there's going to be rules that clarify this, or at least attempt to do so. And that is going to be another potential way to avoid forgiveness reductions. I think what you probably can expect, though, is this measurement will be set way far out in the future, because it talks about an inability to return to prior levels by December 31st, which suggests that the measurement period is going to be December 31st or shortly after that. So if your forgiveness application is going to rely on this particular rule, I think you are looking out, about 6 months. The third way to avoid a forgiveness reduction is also in the PPPFA. And this is what Jeff mentioned as documenting an inability to return to pre-February 15th levels of business activity during the period of March 1st to December 31st due to compliance related to sanitation, social distancing, or safety requirements from guidance by the federal agencies that Jeff had mentioned. That is, at this point, filled with ambiguity about how that will be interpreted, what it will mean, and I think all we're able to say at this point is that it's going to be something to the effect of documenting or certifying that you were unable to return to these levels of business activity for these reasons, which is vague, general, intentionally, because as we've seen before, the rules have been all over the place, and we expect this to be no different. So with that said, the other things that Jeff mentioned are in play no matter what, which is that the deferral of your first loan payment will be after forgiveness is remitted to the lender, or if you don't apply for forgiveness for 10 months from the end of the forgiveness period. And then lastly, there's payroll tax deferral even if you get forgiveness. So with that, we will go to some Q&As and pass to Stacy to start tackling some of these Q&As. If you have particular questions you want answered, vote them up, and we'll go in order of the ones with the most votes.
Okay, so the first one, I think this has been answered, but do we have to keep all employees through the 24 weeks or until December if funds have already been exhausted? Can we adjust hours of staff to stretch the PPP funds longer, not going over 24 weeks? So right now, based on the guidance, based on the lack of guidance, it's either 8 weeks or 24 weeks. And as Darin just went over, if you adjust the hours of staff, they haven't adjusted the FTE safe harbors yet. So
if you already spent all the money, the odds are likely that the 8-week period is a better period for you, because hopefully that meant that you expended that money on keeping a high staffing level, and then therefore you would have low amounts of reductions for FTEs or salary wages.
next question, regarding the owner compensation, and I've seen this question a lot. Since the 8-week period has been extended to 24 weeks, is there any modification to the restriction that owner compensation is limited to 8/52 of 2019 compensation, or has it increased? Nothing has been increased formally yet. Presumably they will adjust that for the 24-week covered period.
I'm gonna say that I would not be super confident that it will be 24 50 seconds for owners, but I would think that it will likely at least be 20,833, which is 2.5 months worth of $100,000 compensation. But again, we have no idea. We're just, we're speculating on this one. We have to wait and see. The rule that said the cap was 15,385 was straight up a rule from the SBA. So eliminating that rule or making the amount higher is going to come in the exact same manner. It's going to come by rule. Sorry, go ahead.
Got to get back up to the top. Hold on. Okay, next question. Since the use of payroll has been extended past 60 days, I rehired my 10 employees May 1st, and I would like to lay them off for 2 to 4 weeks to collect unemployment and then rehire them. Is that acceptable to still qualify for grant status? So again, that hasn't really, there hasn't been any updates to the safe harbors, but you know, you're still required, if you do that, you're going to have trouble with meeting the FTE requirements. Next question. We are filling out the Hawaii unemployment form for an employee who did not accept all work, and now there's a question that asks, was this employee covered under the Paycheck Protection Program? I haven't seen that. I don't know if Jeff, you want to comment on this question? I know in the last, one of the last IFRs, interim final rules that was released, there was a requirement for employers to report that you had to the state unemployment office that you had offered an employee back. So this is probably a result of that. Jeff, you want to unmute?
Oops, the answer to that question is yes. That's tied, that question in the form is tied directly to the PPP rule that if you offer them a job and they don't accept it, they're not entitled to unemployment.
Okay, thank you. Next question is how to return the $10,000 EIDL grant. And we've been asked this a lot as well, and I think in practice what the best thing to do is, since you were supposed to reduce your PPP loan amount was supposed to be reduced by the amount of the EIDL grant that you received. If you received both the full PPP loan amount and the EIDL grant, I would recommend that you just contact your bank and try to return the funds back to your bank versus going through the SPA. And the reason for that being is once you properly go through forgiveness application and your forgiveness is reduced by the amount of your grant, you're going to have a balance remaining on your PPP loan for the amount of the grant. And so if you don't want to, you want to accrue interest on that balance, I would just suggest that you prepay that amount now, if that's what you want to do. So next question, are we now allowed to use funds for as many payroll dates within the 24-week period as our loan proceed allows? Same with non-payroll costs within the percentage limitations. I believe that's the, I think the question is, yes, you can allow for as many payroll dates in the 24-week period. I'm actually not completely sure what the question is asking, but you do have 60% of your loan proceeds can be used on payroll costs during the entire 24-week period. Next question, I am an S Corp and pay myself a modest salary, but also take a regular member draw, which puts me above the 100,000 forgiveness. Have you heard if owners or S Corp companies are on payroll are able to also count member draws as part of their payroll expenses towards forgiveness? And the answer to that is no. So if you're an S Corp, owner, you should be on payroll, and so it's just your payroll that is eligible for forgiveness.
Stacy, can I go back to that last question, please?
Sure.
The one on the 8 weeks and 24 weeks, and extending the payroll. No, right now, the way your choice is, you have 8 weeks or 24 weeks, and as Darin explained, you only have 2.5 months of loan. And so the way the statute reads right now, if you want to choose the 24 weeks, you only the initial forgiveness rule is you need to keep up the FTE and the salary for that entire period, and they're not giving you the money to do that. Okay, so then you have to go to the other forgiveness exceptions. But under the basic rules, the way it's set up is you have 2.5 months, which by my count is 10 weeks or 11 weeks. and you can choose either 8 weeks or 24 weeks. But if you choose the 24 weeks, the same rules still apply. Number one, you keep the same FTEs during the entire 24-week period. Number two, that you keep you maintain their salary or wages, and or that if you don't do that, that you bring them all back on December 31st, or that you satisfy one of the exceptions the OSHA, HHS, or the other government agencies their requirements prevented you from doing that. But that's why Darin initially started out. If you got it all done and you got forgiveness in the 8 weeks, take the 8 weeks, because there's just so many ambiguities with taking the 24 weeks. Thanks, Stacy. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, I would agree. I think for businesses who are, the 24 weeks really only helps businesses that will not experience a loss in revenues, a significant loss in revenues for 24 weeks, because they are still operating and not closed due to a state or county mandated shutdown. So next question. I took PPP a few weeks ago, but did not pay it myself since I took PUA. Can I resign from PUA and start paying myself at any moment, as long as it's within the 24 weeks of the date I received PPP? So I think I can ask both Darin and Jeff to comment on this, but you should not receive PUA benefits during the term of your PPP covered period. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
I think the way in which potentially there's a clear benefit is for solos. So the PUA benefits end on July 31st, right? And so it was sort of a choice between PUA benefits or PPP. And I think at least for the solo, which is not going to have these issues of FTEs, because they are the only FTE, and presumably they shouldn't have the salary wage reductions. They can take PUA through July 31st, and then presumably the 24 weeks extends past that, and then you can use up the full PPP funds, post July 31st. That's, I think, how it's going to end up working. But again, pretty much everything we say comes with a caveat, which is there's going to be substantial rulemaking to come. We've been surprised by rules in the past, and I don't see any reason why this would be any different. So you have to keep watching and see what changes, what's clarified, that sort of thing.
Next question, can the payroll costs be up to 75%, or is that at least 75%? Could be, in theory, spend all PPP funds on payroll? And the answer to the second question is yes, you can, in theory, spend all the PPP funds on payroll. And just as a note, the 75% threshold has been reduced to 60%. Next question, if we have a 40-hour-a-week employee and they are sick or miss work for some other reason, how does it affect your FTE calculation? And I think the reason for the missing work, it would depend on how it affects your FTE calculation. If they're sick and are getting paid sick pay, the FTE requirement is for hours paid, not necessarily worked. If they are on a workers' comp or TDI, I think that the answer to that question is a little bit different. Next question, I'm doing 100% of payroll for PPP. Is this okay? I'm an independent contractor. So I think Darin and I just answered that question. Answer is yes, that's okay. Next question, if the EIDL grant will be deducted from the PPP forgiveness, is a 60-40 percentage based off the initial loan amount? Basically, we are giving back the EIDL, or is the calculation based off the total initial loan minus the EIDL grant? So the EIDL, The 60/40 percentage is based off of the initial PPP loan amount, because that's the maximum amount that you would have been eligible for based on 2.5 months of payroll costs. The forgiveness amount is if you received the EIDL grant and the full loan amount, then the forgiveness amount is reduced by the amount of the EIDL grant. So next question. For payroll costs, the expense must be incurred and paid in the 8-week or alternative pay period. For benefits, including health and retirement benefits, does the incurred and paid rule also apply? Or can it be, or as in non-payroll expenses? So I think the three of us, I'm going to speak for this, but I think the three of us are in agreement that it's incurred or paid within the 8-week period.
I agree.
So next question, we got funded on April 17th. However, our pay period starts from April 16th and we did not bring our employees back to the following week, the 20th. Does this qualify for the alternative payroll period? We pay every 2 weeks. Can I have my alternative pay period to be 5/1? So the alternative covered payroll period is available to only employers on biweekly or weekly payroll. So you would qualify for the alternative payroll period. And it was because you got funded on the 17th, you can start, you can elect to have the alternative covered pay period be the next pay period, which would be May 1st. So you should be okay there. Next question, as a one-member LLC, now that 8 weeks is up to 24 weeks, can we use all the approved funds for non-payroll? Answer to that is yes. Next question, my 8-week covered period ends June 27th. Will I be able to prepay my July rent within my covered period, or can it be paid after June 27th? I would recommend that you prepay, if you want to include the July rent, that you pay it before June 27th, because it would be paid or incurred, and clearly July rent wouldn't be incurred within your covered period. Next question, for payroll costs, the expense must be incurred and paid in the 8-week or alternative. This looks like it was we just answered that, so it was a duplicate. Next question, is FTE required to be maintained for extension time of 24 weeks for forgiveness? And so that we're waiting for, we'd like to see some guidance on that. As the language currently states, you would still need to maintain the FTE count. Did you want to add something, Darin?
I think the language as currently written is actually quite clear that it's the forgiveness period, including the period that you measure FTEs for, is 24 weeks. But yes, I would throw in the caveat that this would not be the first time where rules are issued that may explicitly appear to be contrary to what the statute says. So I would not rule it out of question that there could be a rule that changes that.
And this panelist throws out the bet to the other panelists that SBA will probably say you get to choose 8 weeks within the 24 weeks.
I mean, it's anyone's guess.
But that's Las Vegas. That's not a informed projection.
Stacy, back to you.
Our 8-week period closes this Thursday, which is in the middle of our pay cycle. We have already exceeded the 60% necessary for payroll costs over this past 7.5 weeks. Should we run an extra payroll this week to be in the 8-week period, or simply keep our regular payroll cycle since we've already attained the 60%? So I think you should be fine if you have expended all your funds properly. You wouldn't need to spend more funds on payroll, and presumably you have 40%. You have other non-payroll costs that you can use to spend the 40%.
I think the decision relies on what your FTE and salary wage reductions will be under either measurement. So, the one with the more favorable, the least amount of FTE reduction, so that you have the least amount of having to contort yourself into these safe harbors or employee availability exemptions. That's the path that you're likely going to go.
Okay. Jeff, I'm going to ask you the next question because I know you talked about it before. How much bonuses given is too much bonuses? My 8 weeks is up and I have money left over from what I want, that I want to give my employees. They already got bonuses in their last 2 paychecks.
We can't answer how much is too much. It really depends on, it should depend on your business reason. Are you just giving the money away, or can you have a good justification when you talk to the banker based on hazard or different duties or the distress of working in the facility?
I'd also add that since 75-25 became 60-40, that it may be a situation where instead of a bonus, you might have rent to pay or something like that. So depending on the individual circumstance.
Yep.
I'm going to keep on answering questions, and you guys can jump in if you want to answer any of them. But
oh no, you're doing great.
When is the best time to file for forgiveness? So that's a good question, because I think I think you'd want to probably, if you can, wait because your loan won't accrue interest and there's payment deferrals. You probably want to file for forgiveness once there's better guidance issued, like what Jeff said, and what Jeff's bet is that the SBA might issue guidance that you can pick 8 weeks within the 24 weeks, and once they give better guidance of what that 24-week period, what qualifies under that 24-week period. So there's no harm, I think, in delaying your forgiveness application. And I would also kind of bet that the banks are not going to want to accept forgiveness applications until they have further guidance as well.
But if you did what Darin said at the start, and you employed all your full-time equivalent employees from the first day you got your loan, and you kept all the salary and wages up, and you're pretty darn sure that you're going to get full forgiveness, and you'll lose sleep not knowing that, then submit it. Okay, but if you have questions and you'd prefer to put off that part of the loan that will be a loan for as long as you can, you have 10 weeks. You have 10 weeks to do it.
10
after
months.
the closed period.
10 months.
10 months, excuse me.
Okay, so the next questions, can employees claim unemployment if businesses receive PPP funds? So I guess that would depend on whether or not the employee was offered their job back. If they were available and didn't get offered their job back, then they can claim unemployment. Next question, if an employee's hourly wage is the same from Q1 2020 through the covered period, but the hours are reduced during the covered period, are you still eligible for full forgiveness? And so to answer that question, there was a safe harbor that allowed for the pay rate, maintaining the same pay rate, had to reduce the hours that wouldn't count in the salary wage reduction. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. That
yes.
question answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay. Next question, we are filing under the Hawaii unemployment form online for an employee who did not accept all work, and now there's a question that asks, was this employee covered under the Paycheck Protection Program? We do have a PPP loan, but this employee was not paid under the PPP last week. How should we answer this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. If Scott says it's a yes or no question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question, how long do we have to accept the EIDL loan that is offered to us in the initial email offer? Is there an expiration date on those? And I believe, Jane can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you have 6 months to accept or deny the EIDL application.
Yes, I think that's right. You know,
Next question, our 8 weeks is coming up next week. Do we need to ask the forgiveness after that, or can we extend to until 24 weeks? So it's either either or. You can choose for the 8-week period or the 24-week period, whichever works out better for you. So next question, within the 24 weeks, can we choose when to run payroll? Does it have to be consistent through the 24 weeks? In other words, can we stop now if we've been using it, then start again once we are open? So that again, I think will be difficult for you to meet your FTE, to maintain your FTE for the entire 24 weeks if you do stop payroll for some portion of that time.
The only addition I have there is that's what we've explained repeatedly. It's just not clear. Okay, they gave you 10 weeks of loan, and they're giving you 24 weeks to spend it and keep all your employees and keep all their salaries and wages the same. So it needs to be clarified.
Yeah, I mean, this is just as some commentary, because this is the situation that many businesses, I think, are currently in, right? They have substantial amount of PPP funds they did not expend yet. And now with this 24-week period, the question is what to do. But the reason why these businesses did not expend the money is because they determined or felt that the forgiveness rules were not certain enough for them, that if they expended the money that they were confident, that it would be forgiven, sort of despite anything that we or the rules might have said. And those businesses, you can do these contortions of stopping and then starting payroll back up and that sort of thing. But almost certainly you're going to be facing down, at least under the current language, forgiveness reductions based on the FTEs. And then I think Congress thinks that, well, that's all solved by this new employee availability exemption. But I mean, it's anyone's guess how that's going to be interpreted. And I think you're staring down, if you thought there was uncertainty before, then there is at least as much uncertainty now, I think is my point.
If you're going to work with the 8 weeks, work with the 8 weeks. If you can't work with 8 weeks, all you have now is a substantial amount of ambiguity under the 24 weeks with some different exceptions that haven't been clarified yet.
Yeah, the one area where there was clarity from the start, and that has not changed, is using the full pay, keeping people on full payroll. I mean, it's the Paycheck Protection Program, keeping full payroll for that 8-week period so that there are no reductions on FTEs or salary wage reductions. And then the remaining 25% of funds got used for rent and utilities. That is the scenario that at the beginning was laid out as the sort of go-to scenario of what the whole purpose was. And if you fall within that, then don't change it. That's a full forgiveness scenario and is just as clear today as it was back then. That is the one scenario.
Except now you have a greater flexibility to use more of that 10 weeks or 11 weeks of money you got to use it for rent or things other than payroll costs. That's the one flexibility that the 8-week people have.
Except that if you do that, say you go 60-40 over the 8 weeks, 60% on payroll, 60% will not cover 100% of your payroll for 8 weeks. So let me restate that. 60% of your loan amount, which is 2.5 months of payroll, will not cover 100% FTEs at full pay for the 8-week period. You will end up having to cover that out of pocket. So I don't really see the difference in terms
unless you have a bunch of 20-hour unless you have a bunch of hourly employees that are working 20 hours instead of 40 hours. There may be people in that situation.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I think that's right.
It should also be interesting to see what happens with, I mean, I think a lot of you are starting to get your EIDL loans approved, and whether or not you can use EIDL loan funds for a portion of the 24-week period. Right now, you can't use EIDL and PPP loan funds for the same purpose, but I guess we'll see what happens there. So next question, if loan received when it was 75-25, can this still apply, or is it changed to 60-40? So it's, I think you'd want to, the 60-40 is an easier bar to hit. If you have spent 75% of your loan proceeds on payroll, I think that's even better. You won't get penalized for doing so. Next question, regarding the hourly wage reduction, is SBA asking whether the hourly rate decreased or total wages were decreased as a result of lesser hours worked? So that wage reduction, as long as you maintain the same hourly rate, but you had to reduce the hours, you still, you meet that safe harbor requirement. Next question, if our approved payroll costs and rent payments for the covered period exceed the loan amount, is it okay to enter 0 for business utility payments on line 4 of the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form? I presume that any amount entered under line 4 needs to be accompanied by supporting documentation. So hoping that this approach would minimize unnecessary paperwork for the lender. And you're correct. I think if the only amounts that you need to enter on the forgiveness application is the amounts that you're requesting forgiveness for. So if you don't need to use utility expenses to meet the 40% now, you don't need to submit that. Next comment, I spoke with the SBA today and they said if we got the 10,000 after the PPP loan, we do not have to reduce the loan amount by that. That's news to me, because I think in everything that we've
That's
seen,
news to us.
Yeah. Everything that we've seen, there's actually a specific line on the application that addresses that.
Okay, you can end on the next question.
Bulldog in the background, I guess he was walking around, but it's a pug. And his name is Loki. Thank you.
Okay, glad we clarified everything about PPP today. I mean, the press release from the SBA and Treasury says that rules will be coming out very soon. Well, I think it's shortly or soon or something to that effect. So when that happens, then we will be back. But you know, thanks for sticking with it, and hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and hang in there. Okay, take care.